Hey going guys, welcome back to another video. On this episode, I'm going to be sanding down the boot lid of the XB Coupe, and I'll show you step by step what I do, which works well for me in order to get panels nice and straight. Now before we get into that, I thought I'd give you a closer look at the boot lid so we can identify what coating is actually on it, the reason why they've used that coating, and how to prepare that surface in order to put body filler on. Let's get into it. The boot lid's been painted in a olivey green like coating. Now what that coating actually is epoxy primer. Now I've gone over this in a previous video where I paint stripped a boot lid for that 200B Datsun Coupe I painted. Now I'll explain it again really quickly. So whenever you're doing repairs over a bare metal surface, it's very important that you seal that steel down so no moisture can get in and actually cause that bare steel to rust. So what people use and what I use is epoxy primer. So that seals down all that steel and it's non-porous. So that means that the epoxy primer does not absorb moisture. So that's what we want on a bare steel surface. So now that we've identified that it has epoxy primer on it, is knowing how much of that epoxy primer has actually been applied on that surface. Now you can get a bit of sandpaper and just sand a small area, and that will give you a rough idea anyway how much has actually been applied on there. Now I've done that, and the reason why I like to do that is so I can choose the right sandpaper in order to sand this boot lid down. Now you can use a minimum of 180 grit sandpaper. Now I've found that there's a fair bit of epoxy primer on here, so I'm choosing to use 120. Now the reason why, or another reason why I like to use 120 is that I believe that body filler will stick much better and adhere to 120 scratches opposed to the 180 scratches. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to block down the whole boot lid with 120, so our body filler is going to stick really well. But before we get into that, you need to put a guide coat of some form over the boot lid. So what you can use is black aerosol paint or the charcoal guide coat. Now, I don't like to use the charcoal guide coat on a surface like this, simply because I don't like putting my body filler over the top of the charcoal. So what the charcoal does is basically, it sits in all the scratches and it highlights all the imperfections in the panel. Now, if we're putting body filler on over the top of those scratches, if it's got the charcoal in those scratches, we're actually putting the body filler on over the top of those, like over the top of the charcoal. And look, I haven't tested it, but just to be safe and play the game very safely, I'm not going to choose to use the charcoal, I'm going to use paint. Now, I have heard many horror stories of people getting their cars sandblasted, and the sandblaster actually uses a really coarse sand, and it actually distorts and wrecks the whole panel. And this could be very well one of those scenarios or panels where the sandblaster has actually ruined the panel. Now, it's not completely ruined. Everything is repairable. It all just comes down to time, money and body filler at the end of the day. Okay, I hope you guys can hear me pretty well. If not, you better turn your volume up. Okay, so let's get into it. So what I've basically done is I've sanded it all down with the speed file with 120 grit. So I can now see where all those highs and low spots are. So what I've basically done here is I've got some 120 sheets for the speed file. I've just like tore them into like 20 pieces. The reason for that is that there's areas on the boot lid that hasn't been sanded due to them being low spots. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go around and sand those areas by hand, just so we know that our body filler is going to stick. And so once we've done that, I'm going to give it a real thorough blow off. Make sure I get all that dust out of all the scratches, because last thing we want to do is be putting body filler over the top of those scratches that have dust in them. A bit of surface rust that's come through. Not sure what the go is there. It has kind of pitted a little bit. So what I'll do there, I'll just go and get my roll lock with some 80 grit like disc on it, and I'll just grind that back, and I'll just have to rust treat that. Spots, it's not going to make much difference just to wipe it off with a dry rag. Here's one I prepared earlier. A lot of people might hate on me for using microfiber cloths for literally everything. Look, I can get them pretty cheap. Like Bunnings actually sell, I think, a pack of 50 for like 10 bucks. So it actually works out really, really cheap to just buy them from Bunnings. Okay, welcome to the bog bench. Here we have a cup full of Prepsol. I usually keep all my applicators in here when I get a bit lazy, I guess, and I can't be bothered cleaning them after every single job. So I just let them sit in here, and the Prepsol gets all soaked up by the body filler, and I usually just get a razor blade and I cut all that body filler off, and yeah, it saves a bit of time. But yeah, onto the body filler of choice. We have the 3M Platinum Plus. It comes in a 3 litre tin. It may come in smaller tins, I don't know. I usually just buy a 3 litre one. In regards to price, roughly about $60, $65, $68 roughly. The more you buy, the cheaper like you get it, and that's usually how I buy it. So this is going to be a little bit tricky to film and do this all at once, but what I like to do is run my hand over it and just apply that body filler over those low spots first. If we can get those filled and sanded pretty decently, it will make putting a full skim over the whole boot lid much easier. And I usually run my applicator over the sides just to feather out that edge, and then go over nice and evenly. Now the flatter you put your body filler, the easier it is to sand. There's another big low spot here. Okay, so we've applied the body filler to the large low spots on the boot lid. So just like covering this again, just to make people understand why I've only put filler where I have, is that the areas that I've put the body filler over, they are the largest low spots on the boot lid. So the reason why I do that is that when I sand all those spots down, when I then put a full skim of body filler over the whole boot lid, it will actually save a lot of time and mixing more body filler and applying more body filler on these real low spots, because one skim of body filler won't fill all these up. So that's the reason why I put filler over the low spots first, well, the big ones anyway. In regards to what grits that you use to sand the body filler, in my opinion, you can start with whatever grit you want. Now, to some people, that might sound a bit funny. Let me explain the reason behind it. Providing that you go down through all the different grits or grades of sandpaper, you won't have any shrink back in your primer and your paint later. So let's say I want to start with 36 grit. It's very, very coarse, leaves very, very deep scratches. I would then jump to 80 grit. I would then jump down to say 120, then 180, then 240. So the minimum grade that I would apply like primer over is 180. Now it's very rare that I do that. I always like to finish in 240. The reason why that you gotta finish in 180 or 240 is for this reason. If you were to put primer over real deep scratches in body filler, let's say 80 grit or even 120 even, over time when that primer like cures, it will actually shrink and it will highlight all those scratches in your primer and your paint. Now, a lot of old school people, that's what they used to do. I did work for a company or a shop that mainly done restorations. I won't say the name, I won't give too much information out, but the reason why I left there is because of the standard and the quality that they used to do their repairs on. Now, they used to prime straight over like 120 and 80 grit. And I saw some of the cars that they had painted when I first started. And I could see all like shrink back scratches all in the color. And I was like, oh my God, like what is this place? So coming from like a lot of experience, a lot of years in accident repairs, like shops, like the high standard that they had has sort of come onto me, and I like to do that same standard on much bigger cars like the XB Coupe here. Look, it doesn't matter what job I do. I always like to keep everything the same, do everything in a routine. Because if you start changing the way you do things, then every job's going to be different. You're going to produce a different like quality of standard, and yeah, it's going to be pretty rat shit. So this is the 80 grit. Make sure you put it on nice and straight, and we'll keep sanding. All right, one thing to keep in mind when sanding down those repairs on the large low spot areas, make sure that you don't sand too much of that epoxy primer off around the repairs, because if you sand too much of that off, it will defeat the whole purpose of epoxy priming a bare steel panel. So you want to try and leave as much of that epoxy on there as possible. Okay, so that's where we're at the moment. We haven't sanded too much of that epoxy off. We have in some areas, but I mean, it's not going to make too much of a difference the way it is at the moment. You can see low spots still in that body filler, but honestly, that's no different to any of these other ones. But look how much of that low spot we've actually fixed already. So that's a good step in the right direction. Okay, this is what I was talking about with the bog board. So we've got bog all over it. We just pull that off. Look at that, we've got a nice, clean, fresh slate to start with now. Just pick a few little bits off. And that's all ready for our next skim. So in regards to putting on the next skim, yeah, just pretty much the same mixing technique as we've done before. But we want to be putting more on our bog board. Now, what I like to do with repairs is try and get everything done with one skim of body filler. Now, that's all well and good trying to do that, but I mean, the state of this boot lid, the way it is, it's probably going to need more than one full skim. So, yeah, just make sure that you're mixing up enough body filler to put a full skim over. That should be enough. We'll get our hardener. Make sure you massage that hardener so you don't get any liquid in that body filler. And also mixing that hardener up properly as well also makes it go off much faster as well. So you can either go this way or long ways. I'll probably, to make it easier for the video, I'll probably just go short ways. body fillers pretty much dry now, so we'll throw some 36 grit on the speed file and we'll start blocking this down. There's two different types of rounded blocks that you can use. One is this DuraBlock here, it's like a tube. One is like a teardrop, also has that curve on one side. Really good for getting right in those curved areas and same on that back edge as well. So I'm pretty happy with how it is. I will need to put a final skim over it, but before I do that, I just want to tidy up all these curves with the tubular blocks, and then we'll start sanding it all down with 80 grit. And then we'll put our final skim over the whole boot lid, over the top of that 80 grit, and then we'll sand that all down with 36, 80, 120, and we'll go straight to 240 after that. Alright, so there's a few different reasons why I like to use this charcoal guide coat. The first one is basically to highlight all those 36 grit scratches. So we can basically eliminate them all with the 80 grit, and then we'll guide coat it again, and then go down the stages of the sandpaper grits all the way down to 180. Now, I'm not overly worried about doing that at every single stage just at the moment. The only reason why I've guide coated it is basically to see if there's any low spots that I've missed, and to highlight those 36 scratches so we can sand them all out with 80 grit. So I just thought I'd show you what these 36 grit scratches actually look like. I'm hoping that the camera will pick it up. Yeah, you see all these real deep scratches. So that's the beauty of using that charcoal guide coat, because it really highlights them. And so basically all you're doing is like continuing to sand it until basically it looks like this here with no black scratches in it. So that's a perfect example of what to look for when getting rid of those deeper scratches while you go down through the different grades down to 240. All that's left to do now is to give it a final skim of body filler just to fix those tiny little imperfections here and there, and yeah, make sure we finish in 240 and this boot is ready for primer. So just to give you guys a bit of an update, where I'm up to so far, I've just sanded the whole thing down with 80 grit. I've noticed here that there's a few imperfections in the body filler. Now I could sand those out, but because they're so close to these bare metal areas, by me sanding them out, I'll end up sanding a lot of that body filler out around those bare metal areas, which will cause high spots on those bare metal areas. So sometimes you just gotta stand back, have a think about it, think how is the best way to approach these things. And I think the best idea is just to wipe a tiny little bit more filler in those areas there. Same thing up here as well, because it's so close to that bare metal area, I'll end up sanding a high spot in. So we'll wipe a little bit there, down the bottom, wipe a little bit up here around that hole. There's a low spot there. But yeah, apart from that, it's all blocked up pretty nice, pretty happy with it. So let's get this going and we'll get it finished. All right, so that was those little areas all taken care of. Yeah, so when that body filler dries, all I'll do is I'll give it another charcoal guide coat and then start on the 120, finishing it off in 240. And there you go, guys. Sorry, I'm a little bit out of breath. Been basically sanding this for pretty much a good 8 hours. So it's all done. It's all finished in 240. All ready for some primer tomorrow. So look forward to that. I might do a video on that, I might not. But yeah, so that was pretty much a full detailed explanation, basically how to get some body filler down. We managed to do it in 2 skims, apart from that first initial one in those big low spots. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and yeah, hope you've maybe picked some information up here and there. Tried to keep it pretty basic, but yeah, it's perfectly straight. It's beautiful, in fact, nice and smooth. There's no big deep scratches in any of the filler, as I went down through those grades and I finished it in 240. And there you go, the boot lid's all repaired. It's all been finished in 240, which means that there is no 36, 80 or 120 scratches on this boot lid in the body filler, which means there's going to be no shrink back later, and that's a pretty important thing when it comes to quality paintwork. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Don't mind my face, I've got shit all over it. It's been a big day today, so yeah, hope you've enjoyed this one, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Cheers.